Hey everyone, this is James from Italian Duccio Tessari and Jolly Reviews. Today, bringing you another Jolly review. Today, I am going to be talking about 1971's Bloodstained Butterfly. So kind of one of those mid-range Jolly. A lot of people that are fans of the genre have seen it, but it's kind of outside of even your big four directors. So it is one that you do need to seek out a little bit. It's been restored on Blu-ray. I think Arrow released it quite a while ago. So it's definitely in circulation and one of those Jolly that people are going to be talking about. So quickly, a real quick introduction of the synopsis of the film. A female student is killed and a popular TV personality, Alessandro Marchi, is accused. And so it's basically kind of following around the elements of his accusation. Eventually there are a couple more killings that kind of call into kind of cloud the whole investigation over. And it's a very effectively done mystery. But anyways, we'll get into that later. I actually first saw this film in 2020 and then rewatched it just this year, 2024. I first saw it kind of in the string of when I was watching a lot of different giallo films as well as Duccio Tessari films. So it, I can't say I remembered it particularly well. It didn't stand out super strongly amongst kind of like the big crowd of them. And I think I know why. I'll kind of get into that as I talk about the review a little bit more. Should and why to watch this film? Yes, I do think this is a good giallo and definitely well worth watching. Some people have called this a bit of a Duccio Tessari too. I could get that as well. It definitely has a little more police procedural elements to the kind of the just overall plot construction than your average giallo would. It's not really like right so merrily riding through the streets Duccio Tessari, but you know, I'm not going to scoff at anyone's definition, and I don't want to get into semantic arguments either. But anyways, why this film? Well, it's one that Subjective Perspective Collective brought on to the show, and while I was watching their show and doing some research for my one guest appearance on there, I came across it. I was like, oh, okay. These guys seem to think pretty highly of the film. And so as a result, I was like, okay, maybe this is one that I should revisit. So I watched it, and I realized I barely remembered it at all. And I liked it a fair amount. I think it's a very well put together giallo. I think what you are missing in this one, that some people, especially that want kind of like that Argento style one, is it's very not an Argento style giallo. Despite coming out in the golden age, 1971, and undoubtedly being kind of pushed forward as far as like a release because of kind of the giallo boom that was happening right then. I think this is one where, Duccio Tessari is trying to do something a little bit different. The plot's very well constructed. It's not imbalanced like an Argento film necessarily is, where you have like these big set pieces that are kind of like your big climaxes. A lot of the killing and stuff happens off screen. So yeah, in that sense, it's very, very interesting. Tessari, interesting career too. Definitely got to start writing A Fistful of Dollars, did a lot of Peplum films. He also is probably most famous in terms of like kind of getting his directorial start with the Ringo films with Giuliano Gemma. Those are both pretty good spaghetti westerns, A Pistol for Ringo and Return of Ringo. I think he did a couple more. Those are the only two spaghetti westerns I've seen. He's did a couple different Duccio Tessari and Jolly with Death Occurred Last Night as well as Puzzle. My personal favorite of his films, which I will be reviewing as well, I'm not sure what order I'm releasing that, but that is Tony Arzenta. I think that's a really exemplary kind of just Italian crime film. So lots of solid films, but I one thing I did note is that he has more writing credits than he has directorial credits. And so for me at least, that makes me think that, okay, this guy was definitely like kind of a writer first, as opposed to kind of like an extreme visual stylist. Obviously Argento did a lot of writing as well, but I think it's pretty clear what his strengths as a filmmaker are. This is also one of the rare films that actually gives a writing credit to Edgar Wallace, who is kind of one of those founding fathers of the giallo, just in the sense that the Creamy film is kind of the one that predates it, and a lot of those are based off Edgar Wallace stories. So this is an actual giallo that gives credit to that. And I think it does come off just a little bit drier and perhaps with a little bit less flair than we'd expect from kind of your Bava Argento like extreme lights. This one has like kind of this layer of dreary sleaze to it, and just kind of this atmosphere and feel. And I did see some people compare it to What Have They Done to Solange. I could definitely get that for sure, just in terms of like the overall feel of the film. I think this one is set in Italy, but it has kind of like this almost more Northern Europe or like England feel to it, where it's not as like yeah, it just has a little bit more of that dreary feel, darker. It's raining constantly. Yeah, and it does a lot of interesting things. I think the opening is one of those. I think the opening and the conclusion are probably the two strongest points. The opening is interesting because it's very ambitious in terms of establishing a lot of different characters all at once. It's very, very densely constructed, and a lot of the editing is pretty well done. Yeah, I like it quite a bit. I think this is one that definitely plays well if you rewatch it, perhaps even close to the time you first saw it. I think it's one that you can sort of put together. Okay, I see what they were going for there. And again, it's not really very set piece ways. It cuts away a lot. There's not a lot of gore. It's definitely more playing into the mystery elements. And in that sense, I do think this film is pretty successful. The other part that really stands out for me is the conclusion and just how it gets there. I do spoil the films here, but how the ultimate killer's motivation and Helmut Berger's character in terms of breaking out Alessandro Marchio so he can actually get his revenge is very well done. And I think it's a very, very satisfying conclusion to a very well-constructed film. The film looks generally good, too, despite not being very flashy. Very just good walking, very basic filmmaking, things like that. Tessari combined Polizio Tesco again in a different film, Death Occurred Last Night, that came a year earlier. I watched that one even before this one, probably another film due for a rewatch there. So it's interesting that he would combine those elements too. And it's also interesting that those films both predate kind of that boom of the hybrid film, things like Suspicious Death of a Minor, as well as the Dallamano films, Solange, as well as What Have They Done to Your Daughters. These two films actually predate those, so kind of interesting. This is the very early version of that Polizio Tesco Jolly combination. So, as is the case of a lot of these Italian genre films, specifically giallo, a lot of the craftsmanship done by sort of the supporting players is very well done. The cinematographer here is Carlo Carlini, who has been involved in all kinds of Italian films, does very good work here. Again, not as flashy as we would expect from something like Argento or whatnot, or like Italian films. I mean, some people have it in their head that Italian films just always go crazy. I think this is a good example of how this one's a little bit more grounded and well constructed, and perhaps a little bit of a better bridge depending on your personal approach to just your personal preferences of what you like. If you like a really well constructed plot, then perhaps something like this or a Gastaldi written film are better. Good use of score too. Tchaikovsky is used here prominently. Gianna Ferrio was the composer here. Does a very good job there. In terms of the cast, it's filled with a lot of very familiar faces, but no one huge. The one person I didn't really care for is Helmut Berger, and reading about this film, I do find people are very, very mixed. He has a very striking look. He's a very handsome guy. But just having him walk around and breathe the whole film, I wasn't a huge fan of that performance. I tend to be a little bit allergic to kind of like that angsty young male that's kind of upset and part of like the rich Italian upper class. It's definitely a reoccurring trope in particularly the Polizio Tesschi, but it just doesn't quite work for me there. I do think the rest of the cast is good. Ida Gali, Gunther Stoll is playing a really sleazy lawyer. I love his performance and his role in general. So yeah, I think it's one of those casts where you're gonna if you like these sorts of films, you're gonna be like, okay, I recognize that guy, that lady. So yes, interesting use of kind of this very spaghetti western music during sex, very intense sex with Berger. I actually kind of laughed at that. I thought it was a little funny. But yeah, I think this is a good film. So thank you for the guys over at Subjective Perspective Collective for kind of bringing my attention back to this film. I think this is definitely one that was due a revisit. So much so that I'm like, did I actually watch this film? My memory of it is so poor. And usually my memory is pretty good of films. But, I was watching so many of these films at the time that perhaps it was one that just kind of blended in. Maybe I watched another giallo that day too. Who won the film? Going to give it to Duccio Tessari. And yeah, look for another of Tessari's films, Tony Argento, to I'll be reviewing that shortly too. Double feature, I think the logical choice, Death Occurred Last Night, the Polizio Tesco giallo that came out just the year before. Rating 7 out of 10. I don't quite think this is like a masterpiece of giallo, but just a very solidly well-constructed. If I were to criticize it just a little bit, it does sometimes lack a little bit of energy, and I do think kind of having the big central force in something like Solange of Fabio Testi or Claudio Castanelli and What Have They Done to Your Daughters. I think that helps kind of draw, just hold your attention a little bit more. So as much as I love that guise of Italian cinema, I think, those are just a couple of the minor things. But I think this is a good film. I could also see myself coming up on the rating. In fact, I already like this more, apparently, than I did on my viewing that I can't remember in 2020. I rated it a 6 out of 10 there. So thank you all for tuning in. Let me know what you think of Bloodstained Butterfly, and I will see you all next time. Cheers.